As seems to happen a lot these days, something that should have been a peaceful vigil soon erupted into a violent riot where arrests had to be made. The art of peaceful protest has been lost on the masses who consider any emotional turmoil to be a license to act out their criminal fantasies. Even when the emotional distress is a completely reasonable response, rioting and setting things on fire isn't. The campus of Georgia Tech in Atlanta was the scene of the crimes as a group of roughly 50 people marched on the Georgia Tech Police Department. Their outrage is a response to the death of a 21-year-old student of the university who was shot by police. The student was found to have not only left multiple suicide notes but also to have called the police himself. Freedom Daily reported on the incident Monday and gave the details of how the event played out and what might have caused it. The attorneys for the parents of the student, who was an outspoken LGBTQ activist, are citing the police's inability to deal with those who are mentally ill. However, it's unclear if that's the official LGBTQ platform on the issue or just the parents' opinions. Transgenderism or gender dysmorphia are still considered mental illnesses. These kinds of issues are much less rare now, but not less damaging. The young man in question was extremely troubled by something, and as you'll see in the video and transcript, he knew what he was doing. This is what's known as suicide by cop. It's awful and horrible, and the death of any human, no matter how loved or unloved, is a tragedy, but it wasn't the fault of anyone but the person himself, just like with any suicide. As much as his parents may want to say that this was hate-fueled in some way, this kid obviously had just as many opportunities as anyone to obey orders, and he chose his fate. Students at Georgia Tech were understandably upset about the death of their classmate and planned to remember him with a vigil. However, that soon dissolved into an angry mob looking for revenge rather than remembrance. Via Daily Mail. A vigil for a non-binary engineering student who was shot and killed by Georgia Tech campus police turned into a violent riot Monday. Protesters set a police car on fire as a group of 50 marched to the Georgia Tech Police Department on the Atlanta campus. One officer is in the hospital and 3 demonstrators are in jail. The protests follow the death of Scout Schultz, 21, who was killed by campus police after they thought the student was threatening them with a small knife. Georgia Bureau of Investigation spokeswoman Nellie Miles says 3 suicide notes were found in Schultz's dorm room. Investigators revealed Schultz made the phone call to police about an armed and suspicious person fitting their description. The results of this shooting were no doubt tragic, but not the fault of the police. The officers in question responded to a call about an armed suspect and they treated him as such. It had nothing to do with the gender, or non-gender, of the student. It had to do with the fact that someone was coming at an officer with a weapon. According to a press release from the Bureau, the Georgia Tech campus police received a 911 call of a person with a knife and a gun at 11:17 p.m. Saturday night. The release says Schultz was not cooperative and would not comply with the officer's commands. Schultz continued to advance on the officers with a knife. Subsequently, one officer fired, striking Schultz. Schultz's parents have hired trial attorney L. Chris Stewart to represent them ahead of the investigation into their child's death. At Georgia Tech, Schultz was president of the school's Pride Alliance, which is a student organization for LGBTQ students and allies. The Pride Alliance released a statement that described Schultz as a driving force behind the group thanks to their hard work and dedication. "We love you, Scout, and we will continue to push for change," the statement concluded. The work that Schultz was doing for those that he identified with is no doubt going to be remembered by those that loved him. The extremely telling part of this story is the fact that Schultz's parents plan to look into whether or not police officers should have treated him differently because of his mental instability. I think many would agree that he probably was mentally unstable, but there would also be a huge outcry from the very LGBTQ community that Schultz worked with if he'd been treated differently because he looked to have an instability of some kind. His problems were arguably connected to his non-binary identification in some way, but those in the LGBTQ community are so staunchly against their preferences being branded as disorders. You can't have it both ways. Either you want to be treated just like everyone else, which is what the officers did, or you admit that this kind of gender confusion is a disorder, in which case it needs medical attention. You just can't march for equal treatment one day and riot the next because you got it.